You wake up every morning with the weight of cold metal against your skin, but it's not just the armor you carry, it's the weight of expectations you never chose to bear. The first light of dawn filters through the narrow window of your chamber, casting long shadows across the stone floor. The chill in the air settles on your skin for a familiar companion, neither welcome, warm welcome, simply present, as it has been 4 years beyond counting. Your fingers trace the worn edges of your breastplate, feeling each dent and scratch, a tapestry of moments that have shaped your days. The metal is cold at first touch, but warms slowly beneath your fingertips, as if recognizing its keeper. There is comfort in this ritual, in the way the material world acknowledges your existence through these small physical interactions. The bed creaks as you rise, a sound that echoes briefly in the sparse chamber. You've come to measure your mornings. By these sounds the beds protest the distant call of birds, and beyond the stone walls, the soft hiss of your feet against the floor. Time moves differently here, marked not by the urgency of battle or the demands of nobility, but by these gentle constants that anchor you to the present. You move to the basin of water left by the page the night before. It has grown cold overnight, and when you splash it against your face, it awakens every nerve. This shock of sensation is welcome, a reminder that beneath the weight of duty and expectation you remain flesh and blood, vulnerable to the simple elements of the world. Water drips from your chin, each droplet catching light as it falls back into the basin. Outside, the fortress is already stirring. Through the walls, you can hear the muffled sounds of the keep coming to life, kitchen staff preparing the day's first meal, stable boys tending to horses, guards changing their watch with the measured rhythm of practiced routine. These sounds form a tapestry of normalcy that has become your foundation. You dress slowly, deliberately, feeling the weight of each garment as it settles on your frame. The undertunic soft from years of washing, the padded gambeson that will cushion the weight of mail, and plate the leggings worn thin at the knees from prayer and kneeling before those you serve. Each piece is a layer between you and the world, both protection and burden. The window beckons, and you answer its call as you do each morning. Stone frames the view like a painting rendered by a master's hand, rolling hills that fade into distant mountains, fields where farmers are already at work, tiny figures moving with purpose beneath the vast sky. Horses graze in the meadow below, their freedom a sight you observe but rarely experience for yourself. The morning air carries the scent of earth and hay, of bread baking in the kitchens below, of leather and oil from the stables. You breathe deeply, filling your lungs with these essences of life that continue regardless of the politics of men or the weight of duty. In this moment, before you don the final pieces of your armor, before you step into the role assigned to you, you allow yourself to simply be a person standing at a window, watching the world awaken. Soon you will descend the winding staircase to break your fast in the great hall. You will nod to those who serve and those who command. You will speak the words expected of your station and listen to reports and requests. But for now, in this brief interlude between sleep and duty, you exist in a space that belongs only to you. These few breaths, these moments of witnessing this silent communion with the day that stretches before you, unmarked and full of the small mercies that make life bearable. Your hand comes to rest on the stone windowsill, feeling its cool solidity. This tower has stood 4 generations before you and will stand 4 generations after. There is peace in this knowledge, being part of something that transcends your singular existence. The weight you carry is not yours alone, but shared across time with those who came before and those who will follow. In this understanding, you find the strength to face another day. You live in a tower of stone where the wind whispers through narrow crevices, a constant companion that speaks in voices both strange and familiar. Sometimes it howls like a lost soul, other times it hums a gentle lullaby that eases you into sleep. You've learned to read its language over the years, a skill born of patience and solitude. The walls around you bear the marks of time. In the corner near your bed, there's a slight discoloration where water once seeped through during a particularly harsh winter. Along the eastern wall, tiny cracks form a pattern that reminds you of a river delta you once saw in a manuscript. The Stones themselves seem to breathe, expanding in summer heat, contracting in winter's embrace. You've pressed your palm against them countless times, feeling the subtle pulse of the fortress alive in its own ancient way. Your chamber is sparse by noble standards, but rich in the things that matter to you. A small oak table holds your few possessions, a silver comb passed down from your father, a leather-bound journal, where you occasionally record your thoughts, a smooth river stone, gifted by a child from the village below. These objects carry memories, anchoring you to moments when the world seemed less complicated. The wooden chair by the hearth bears the impression of your form, after years of sitting watching flames dance their nightly performance. Its arms are worn smooth where your hands have rested, and one leg is slightly shorter than the others, causing a gentle rocking motion that has become oddly comforting. On cold nights, the tapestry hanging on the western wall provides both warmth and beauty. Faded from years of sunlight, it depicts a forest scene with deer moving through dappled shadows. You often find yourself studying it, imagining the cool touch of those woven leaves, the silence of that moment frozen in thread and wool. Sometimes, when sleep eludes you, the deer, 7 in total, and wonder about the hands that created this piece, whether they found peace in the making. Your armor stands on its rack in the corner, a silent sentinel that never rests. In the flickering candlelight, it casts complex shadows on the wall, sometimes resembling figures in motion, sometimes architectural forms that could not possibly exist. You've given names to some of these shadows in your mind, greeting them like old friends when darkness falls. Beneath the narrow window sits a chest of oak bound with iron. Inside are letters from your sister, who lives by the sea, sachets of lavender that the herbalist replenishes each season, maps of lands you've never visited but have studied until their geography feels as familiar as the contours of your own palm. The chest's lock is ornate, but has never been used. There is little need for such precautions here, where trust forms the foundation of daily life. From your window, the changing seasons paint the landscape in different hues: spring's tender green giving way to summer's golden abundance, autumn's fiery displacement rendering to winter's austere beauty. The apple orchard to the west blooms pink and white in spring, its perfume reaching even your high window on warm days. In autumn, the distant vineyards turn to copper and bronze, and sometimes, when the wind is right, you can smell the sweet fermentation of the harvest. The sounds that filter through your window form a constant symphony: blacksmiths hammering at dawn, children's laughter at midday, the low murmur of evening prayers from the chapel. Bells mark the hours, their resonance felt as much as heard. At night, when the fortress sleeps, you sometimes catch the melancholy hooting of an owl or the soft padding of the castle cats as they prowl for mice. These surroundings have shaped you more than any battle or decree. The stone has taught you patience, the wind resilience, the changing seasons acceptance. You've learned to find beauty in the ordinary, the way morning light catches dust motes in golden suspension, how rain transforms the courtyard cobblestones into a mirror of the sky, the particular quality of silence that follows the year's first snowfall. Your world is bounded by these walls, yet infinite in its details. Each day reveals something previously unnoticed: a particular shade of blue to the twilight sky, the intricate pattern of frost on your window, the way candlelight reflects in a goblet of wine. You've discovered that attention is a form of reverence, and in paying attention is found a kind of freedom that transcends your physical constraints. The people around you carry their own battles, their stories etched in the lines of their faces and the calluses of their hands. You've learned to read these signs as clearly as any written text, finding in them a deeper truth than words could convey. There's old Willem the cook, who lost sight in one eye during a kitchen fire years ago. He still prepares meals with the precision of someone who knows each spice by touch and scent. You've watched him from the kitchen doorway, his large hands moving with surprising delicacy as he pinches salt crumbles, dried herbs, stirs broths that simmer for hours. When he thinks no one is looking, he sometimes sings to his pots old ballads about love and loss that he would never admit to knowing. You've never mentioned hearing these songs, understanding that some vulnerabilities are not meant to be acknowledged. Each morning, Willem saves the crispest corner of fresh bread for you, placing it on your plate without comment. This silent gesture contains more kindness than any flowery speeches you've endured in the Great Hall. In return, you make sure to compliment his food, specifically noting the hint of rosemary in the stew or the perfect flakiness of the pie crust. His gruff nod is all the response you need. Elsa the washerwoman transforms monotony into melody as she works. Her voice rises above the steaming washtubs, sometimes joyful, sometimes tinged with melancholy. Her hands are red and chapped from lye and constant immersion in water, yet, when she folds the linens, her touch is gentle. You once helped her carry a heavy basket when her daughter was ill, and since then she's added sprigs of lavender to your sheets, a luxury she extends to no one else. The blacksmith Thorn rarely speaks above a whisper, his voice permanently affected by the smoke and heat of his forge. His massive frame belies his gentle nature, evident in how carefully he handles the injured birds that seem drawn to his workshop. He fashioned your current sword belt, refusing payment and only asking that you remember his daughter, who serves as an apprentice healer in a distant abbey, in your prayers. You've never failed in this promise, adding her name each night before sleep claims you. Young Thomas, your page, watches you with eyes that still hold the shine of innocence, despite the harshness of training. At 12, he believes every tale of glory and honor with a fervor that sometimes makes your heart ache. You've seen him practicing sword forms in the moonlight, his thin arms trembling with effort, but never giving up. You pretend not to notice the way he mimics your walk, your gestures, your manner of speech. Instead, you patiently correct his technique, praise his improvements, and occasionally share the less heroic truths of battle, to break his spirit, but to prepare him for realities that storytellers often omit. Father Ambrose tends the chapel with quiet devotion, his hands spotted with age turn the pages of ancient texts with reverence. You've found unexpected comfort in your morning conversations with him, discussions that wander from theology to philosophy to the simple beauty of birdsong. He never preaches to you or demands confessions. Instead, he listens, offering wisdom wrapped in humble phrases, I too have wondered, or perhaps we might consider. When your faith falters, he sits in silence beside you, his presence more healing than any sermon. Lady Marian the healer carries knowledge in her fingertips. She can diagnose ailments by the subtle changes in a person's skin or the cadence of their breathing. Her chambers smell of dried herbs and beeswax, a comforting blend that has greeted you during your infrequent injuries. She speaks little of her past, but the foreign accent that emerges when she's tired hints at journeys far beyond these walls. She once confided that she stays not out of obligation, but because she found truth here, a statement whose meaning you still contemplate. The stable master Rowan communicates better with horses than with people. His words to humans are few and often brusque, but you've observed the gentle murmurs he reserves for the animals in his care. The horses respond to him with a trust that speaks of deep understanding. You gained his respect not through your rank, but through the way you treat your mounter, chestnut mare with one white sock, that you've ridden for 7 years. Sometimes, when melancholy weighs heavily, you visit the stables at night, finding peace in the rhythmic sounds of horses breathing and the clean scent of fresh hay. Each person in this community forms a thread in the tapestry of your days. Their strengths and weaknesses, their hopes and sorrows, their small kindnesses and silent struggles all create a pattern more complex and beautiful than any court intrigue. You've learned that true nobility lies not in bloodlines or titles, but in how one treats those whom society deems lesser. In the genuine respect you offer to each person regardless of station, found a kind of honor that no formal code could encompass. As twilight falls and the fortress settles into evening rhythms, you sometimes stand at your window, watching the pinpricks of light appear in windows below, each representing a life connected to yours through the invisible bonds of shared experience. In these moments you understand that you are both keeper and kept, both protector and protected, part of something far greater than yourself. Days here pass with the measured cadence of ritual, each hour marked by bells that echo across the fortress. You've grown so accustomed to their rhythm that you often know the time without consciously counting the tolls. Your body has internalized this music of routine, this percussion of passing moments. Morning begins before the sun fully rises. You wake to the gentle scratch of dawn light against your eyelids, your body responding to years of discipline. There is comfort in these first quiet moments, when the world exists in that liminal space, between night and day, when possibilities seem to hover in the air like mist. The ritual of dressing follows methodical movements refined by repetition. Linen shirt against skin, woolen tunic for warmth, leather belt to hold your knife and pouch. When required, the weight of armor comes next, a transformation that is both physical and mental. You become something different when the metal encases you, something both more and less than your essential self. Breakfast is taken in the great hall among others of your rank. Conversation flows around you like water around a stone, politics, weather, gossip from distant keeps. You contribute when necessary, listening more than speaking. You've learned that silence often reveals what words conceal. The bread is always freshest at this hour, still warm from the ovens below. You savor each bite, finding pleasure in this simple sustenance. Morning duties vary with the seasons and needs of the keep. Sometimes you train in the yard, your sword an extension of your arm, moving through forms that your muscles remember, even when your mind wanders. The rhythmic clash of metal, the controlled breathing, the focus required, these elements create a moving meditation that clears your thoughts. Other mornings find you in council chambers, seated among advisors, as matters of governance are discussed. Maps are unfurled, reports are read, decisions are weighed. You speak when you have something of value to contribute, your words chosen with care. You've noticed how the Lord watches you during these sessions, his eyes measuring your responses. You sense he values your perspective, though he rarely says as much. Midday brings a brief respite, a meal taken sometimes alone, sometimes with companions. When weather permits, you prefer to eat in the small garden tucked against the eastern wall. There, among herbs and flowers tended by Brother Alphonse, you find moments of peace. The scent of rosemary and thyme rises around you, bees hum among lavender blossoms, and sometimes a bold robin comes to investigate your presence, head cocked in curious assessment. Afternoons often find you attending to the needs of those who serve the keep. You listen to petitions, mediate minor disputes, ensure that supplies are properly distributed. These tasks require patience and fairness, virtues you've cultivated through years of practice. You've found that justice delivered with compassion creates loyalty that force could never command. When time allows, you ride out beyond the walls, your mare moving beneath you with familiar grace. These journeys serve practical purposes: inspecting boundaries, visiting outlying farms, escorting merchants along dangerous roads. But they also provide freedom, however temporary. With only the sky above and the land around you briefly shed the weight of your position. The wind carries different scents here, wild thyme, sun-warmed pine, the mineral tang of distant mountains. As daylight fades, you return to the fortress for the evening meal. Candles illuminate the great hall, their light softening the hard edges of stone and casting everyone in a golden glow that forgives imperfections. Wine flows, conversation grows louder, and occasionally music fills the space, a traveling minstrel sharing songs from distant lands, or the steward's daughter playing the lute with surprising skill. You allow yourself to be present in these moments of communal warmth, though part of you remains watchful, aware. Evenings belong to quieter pursuits. Sometimes you join Father Ambrose in the library, poring over manuscripts that connect you to thoughts from centuries past. Other nights you sit with the captain of the guard, discussing strategies over a game of chess, the carved pieces moving across the board like armies in miniature. Often you simply retreat to your chamber, where the solitude is welcome after a day. Among others, before sleep claims you, there is a final ritual. You stand at your window, observing the fortress as it settles into night. Torches flicker along the walls, stars emerge above, and somewhere in the distance a nightingale offers its plaintive song. You take this inventory of your world, acknowledging both its limitations and its beauty. In bed, before closing your eyes, you often place your hand against the stone wall beside you, feeling its enduring coolness. The fortress has stood for generations and will remain long after you are gone. There is both humility and comfort in this knowledge you are but one moment in its long existence, yet your presence matters adds to its story. With this thought, you surrender to sleep, ready to begin again when morning comes. Sounds map your world as surely as any cartographer's parchment. They reach you in layers, some distant, some intimate, creating an invisible landscape that you navigate by ear as much as by sight. The deepest layer consists of the fortress itself, a living entity that speaks through groans of settling stone and whispers of air moving through ancient passages. During winter storms, the wind finds secret channels in the masonry, producing a hollow moaning that rises and falls with haunting musicality. In summer, the heated stone expands with audible sighs that mark the passage of particularly warm days. You've learned to read these sounds like auguries, often predicting weather changes before the castle's official soothsayer makes his pronouncements. Water provides its own constant commentary, the rhythmic drip from the gargoyle outside your window after rainfall, the distant rush of the river. Beyond the eastern wall, the splash of the well bucket being drawn up at dawn. During heavy storms, rainwater courses through the elaborate drainage system, creating a liquid symphony that rises from gentle patter to thunderous cascade as the night progresses. Human activity forms the middle layer of this acoustic tapestry. The blacksmith's hammer rings with metallic clarity each morning, establishing a heartbeat for the working day. Horses in the stable yard offer occasional whinnies and the solid, comforting sound of hooves on packed earth. From the kitchen comes the percussive chopping of vegetables, the hiss of water meeting hot metal, the clatter of pottery and utensils that signals approaching meal times. The training yard produces its own distinctive chorus, the clash of practiced swords, the thud of arrows finding their targets, the scrape of boots on sand, and the calls of instruction from older knights to their charges. You can gauge the progress of the younger squires by the changing rhythm of these sounds, noting when hesitant parries become confident counters. Voices weave through all these layers, carrying emotion and information in their tones as much as in their words. The cook's booming commands contrast with the stable boy's shy murmur. The lord's measured cadence differs from the breathless excitement of children playing in the lower courtyard. The washerwoman's songs rise above the splash of laundry tubs, sometimes joyful, sometimes laden with melancholy that makes you pause in your passing. In the great hall, conversation ebbs and flows like tide against shore. During feasts, it swells to a sea of sound where individual voices are lost in collective expression of community. In council meetings, voices lower to the hushed tones of serious deliberation, punctuated by the occasional scrape of a moved chair or the rustle of unfolded parchment. The most intimate layer belongs to sounds that reach you alone, the quiet breathing of your page sleeping on his pallet near your door, the scratch of your quill against parchment when you write in your journal, the subtle creak of your armor as you move. At night, your own heartbeat sometimes becomes audible in the profound silence of your chamber, a reminder of mortality that both humbles and reassures. Bells mark the canonical hours, their bronze voices calling across the fortress. With different personalities, the morning bell rings bright and insistent, the midday bell resonates with steady purpose, the evening bell speaks with mellow depth that seems to expand in the cooling air. The night bell rung only once offers a single sustained note that hovers in the darkness before slowly fading, a sound that has accompanied you into sleep for countless nights. Beyond the fortress walls, nature contributes its voices to this ongoing composition. Dawn brings the liquid trilling of birds, greeting the new day, opens first, then thrushes, followed by the chattering chorus of smaller songbirds. Noon sees the harsh call of hunting hawks circling above the distant fields. Evening introduces the first tentative hoots of owls from the forest edge, and the rhythmic pulsing of crickets warming themselves on sun-heated stones. Seasons change this soundscape in subtle ways. Spring rain patters differently than autumn drizzle. Summer thunder rolls with dramatic resonance, while winter brings a distinctive silence, the hush of falling snow that seems to absorb all other sounds into its white embrace. You've learned to treasure this winter quiet, finding in it a rare opportunity for complete stillness. Sometimes rarely music transforms the ordinary audio landscape. It's a something transcendent. When the travelling minstrel visits, bringing songs from distant lands, the great hall falls silent in a way that differs from tension or boredom, a silence of collective attention, of shared journey through melody and verse. During religious festivals, chants from the chapel drift up with their harmonies, seeming to vibrate within the very stones of your chamber. You've become a connoisseur of silence, as well as sound, recognizing its many varieties. There is the comfortable silence shared with Father Ambrose during your morning walks along the ramparts, the watchful silence of sentries at their posts, the weighted silence that follows difficult news, the peaceful silence of early dawn when the world seems to hold its breath in anticipation of the coming day. Through years of attentive listening, these sounds have become more than background to your existence. They form a language that speaks directly to something beneath thought, connecting you to your surroundings in ways beyond the visual or tangible. In this acoustic embrace, you find belonging, a sense of place that transcends the duties and expectations that brought you here. At night, as you drift towards sleep, you sometimes imagine all these sounds gathering like tributaries flowing into a river of memory, carrying you gently into dreams, where they transform into new compositions. Sound becoming color, rhythm becoming emotion, voices becoming presence before dissolving into the deeper silence of true rest. Your hands have learned what your mind sometimes forgets. They carry their own memories encoded in calluses, scars, and the particular way your fingers curl around familiar objects. They know things your thoughts cannot articulate, a wisdom of touch and texture that exists beyond language. The sword hilt fits your right palm. If it were an extension of your arm, the leather wrapping worn to a polish by years of contact with your skin. Your hand remembers the proper grip without conscious direction, fingers finding their places, automatically adjusting pressure with subtle precision. Even in darkness, your hand would know this weapon, its weight and balance, the slight nick in the crossguard where it once deflected an axe blow, the way the pommel warms gradually against your palm. These same hands that can wield weapons with deadly efficiency also know gentler tasks. They can thread a needle by candlelight when your tunic tears, the thick fingers becoming surprisingly nimble when required. They know the exact pressure needed to calm your mare when she startles at thunder, the rhythmic stroking along her neck that steadies her breathing and yours. Your hands have learned patience through countless hours of polishing armor, working oil into metal with circular motions that become meditative in their repetition. They know precisely how much pressure will remove tarnish without scratching the surface, how to reach the difficult joinings between plates, how to test the smoothness of the finished work with the sensitive skin of your fingertips. They carry marks of your history, the small crescent scar on your left thumb from your first attempt at whittling as a child, the calluses along your palms from years of weapons training, the barely visible burn on your right index finger from rescuing a pot of soup that nearly toppled into the fire during your first campaign. Each mark tells a story your voice might never share. Your hands know kindness. They remember how to break bread so that the portion you offer has the best crust, how to help an elderly servant navigate icy steps without seeming to provide assistance, how to adjust a child's grip on a wooden practice sword without causing embarrassment. They have wiped tears from faces, bound wounds on battlefields, and held the hands of the dying when no other comfort could be offered. They know reverence, how to hold ancient manuscripts without damaging their fragile pages, how to light devotional candles so the flame catches without sputtering, how to fold hands in prayer in a gesture that has remained unchanged since childhood. In the chapel, fingers trace the worn edges of stone saints with a touch that is both question and acknowledgement. Your hands recognize textures as distinctly as your eyes perceive colors. They know the rough honesty of undressed stone, but a soft suppleness of well-tended leather, the cool perfection of polished marble, the comforting weight of wool in winter. They can identify different types of wood: blindfolded oak with its solid grain, pine with its subtle stickiness, walnut with its distinctive smoothness. They know work, real work that leaves blisters and strengthens sinews. Despite your rank, you have never shied from physical labor when necessary. Your hands have dug defensive trenches repaired fortress walls hold water during droughts, and helped harvest crops when illness depleted the available workers. This willingness has earned you respect from the common folk that no title could command. Your hands know how to be still. In council meetings they rest flat against a table, neither fidgeting nor forming fists, regardless of how heated the discussion becomes. This deliberate calm often influences others more than words could. During difficult conversations, your hands remain open on your knees, a physical manifestation of willingness to listen without prejudgment. They know ritual and routine, the crossing of chest during prayer, the salute to fellow knights, the gesture of respect toward the Lord's banner. These movements have been performed so many times, they exist in your body's memory, hiring no conscious thought to execute with perfect precision. Your hands recognize the changing seasons through touch as much as your eyes do through sight, the particular brittleness of autumn leaves, the crystalline delicacy of frost patterns in winter, the tender vulnerability of spring shoots, the dusty warmth of summer-baked stone. They gauge temperature, predict weather, test the rightness of fruit with a knowledge accumulated through decades of tactile experience. Most importantly, your hands know how to reach out across divides of rank, across barriers of misunderstanding, across the distance that grief or anger creates between people. They know when a firm clasp is needed and when a lighter touch will heal. They have learned that connection often begins with this simple act, one hand extending toward another, in offer or acceptance. At night, as you drift towards sleep, your hands finally rest, fingers slightly curled on the blanket, releasing the day's tensions. Even in this repose, they remain ready to comfort, to defend, to build, to pray. In their scarred and callous state, they contain the truth of your life more honestly than any chronicle or song. Flavors mark your days, like notches on a sundial measuring time through the rituals of sustenance that punctuate your hours. These tastes do more than nourish your body, they connect you to seasons, to memories, to the community that surrounds you. Each meal tells a story of place and time, of labor and care, of tradition. It's aimed through generations of careful hands. Morning begins with the simple alchemy of bread and honey. The bread comes from the fortress ovens, dense, substantial, with a crust that shatters pleasingly between your teeth and a soft interior that carries the faint sourness of proper fermentation. The honey changes with the seasons, pale and delicate in spring, when the bees visit apple blossoms, darker and more complex in summer, when they move among wildflowers in the meadows. You take your time with this first meal, allowing the contrast between the bread's earthiness and the honey's sweetness to fully develop on your tongue. The morning ale serves more purpose than pleasure, watered down. It is proper for the day's first drink. It offers necessary hydration, along with the subtle bitterness of hops and the grainy foundation of barley. You never take more than a single cup, needing clarity for the day's duties, but you appreciate the craftsmanship of the brewer, who maintains a consistency that many lords would envy in their more prestigious wines. Midday brings heartier fare stews that simmer through the morning hours, absorbing flavor from bones and roots and herbs until each spoonful contains a concentration of nourishment. Depending on the season, you might taste the gamey richness of venison, the homely comfort of chicken, or the earthy depth of mushrooms gathered from the forest edge. The cook has a particular talent for balance, never too much salt, always enough acid from wine or preserved lemons to brighten the deeper notes of long cooked meat and vegetables. You've noticed that meals taste different when shared. The same bread seems more satisfying when broken among companions, the same wine more complex when poured for others before yourself. There is something in the act of communal eating that enhances flavor, perhaps the conversation that accompanies it, perhaps the simple human connection that reminds you why sustenance matters at all. On feast days, when the Lord's table overflows with abundance, you sample delicacies that connect the fortress to the wider world, spices carried along dangerous roads from distant lands, preserved fruits that speak of sunshine and foreign soils, confections of sugar and almond that represent both wealth and artistry. You appreciate these luxuries, but find your true satisfaction in simpler tastes, the perfect ripeness of a local pear, the sharp clarity of fresh mint in spring, the comforting solidity of root vegetables that sustain through winter's lean months. Evening meals often feature soups that gather the day's remaining ingredients into harmonious wholes. You've developed particular fondness for the garlic soup served on cold nights, humble in its components, but profound in its ability to warm both body and spirit. Just 3 elements: garlic softened in oil until sweet stale bread to provide substance, and water transformed through slow cooking into something far greater than its parts, create a perfect balance that requires nothing more than perhaps a sprinkle of herbs from the garden. Wine accompanies these evening meals, its character changing with the fortress's fortunes and the success of local vineyards. In abundant years, you enjoy the regional vintage, ruddy and forthright tasting of the very soil you walk upon daily. In leaner times, the steward portions out smaller measures of wines from the Lord's reserves, their more refined profiles, serving as reminders of a wider world beyond your walls. Some flavors mark specific memories so powerfully that they transport you through time with a single taste. The particular combination of cinnamon and dried apple returns you instantly to the winter, when heavy snows isolated the fortress for 6 weeks, and preserved fruits became precious treasures, shared sparingly among the community. The bright intensity of the first spring sorrel recalls the year when unexpected peace allowed attention to the kitchen gardens, expanding them beyond mere necessity into places of culinary experimentation. You've learned to recognize signs of the changing earth through taste before sight, the slight bitterness that enters the greens as summer heat intensifies, the increasing sweetness of root vegetables after the first frost breaks down their starches, the particular oiliness that develops in nuts allowed to fully ripen on their branches. These subtle transformations connect you to the land's rhythms more intimately than any calendar. Some flavors belong exclusively to place, the distinctive mineral quality of water drawn from the fortress, well, the slight smokiness that permeates everything cooked over the kitchen's ancient hearth, the special tang of cheese made from milk produced by cows that graze on the particular combination of grasses growing in the northern meadow. You would recognize these tastes blindfolded, your tongue mapping home as surely as your eyes could identify the fortress silhouette on the horizon. There are tastes reserved for ritual and remembrance, the blessed bread shared after chapel services, carrying an additional savor that transcends its physical components, the traditional salted porridge served on the anniversary of the fortresses, found in connecting present residents to ancestors through identical sustenance, the ceremonial sip of spiced wine that passes from hand to hand during midwinter celebrations, each person adding a wish to the common cup before drinking. You've come to value the honesty of food, prepared without pretension, the clean simplicity of vegetables pulled from the ground and cooked hours later, the straightforward pleasure of fresh butter on warm bread, the essential rightness of salt on meat. In a world often complicated by politics and positioning, these direct tastes offer truth without interpretation or agenda. When you travel beyond the fortress walls, a rare occurrence in recent years, you find yourself gauging new places by their flavors as much as by their appearance or customs. The particular way a village bakes its bread tells you more about its character than its buildings. The balance of seasonings in a stranger's offered meal reveals volumes about local values and history. As you age, you notice your appreciation for subtlety increasing. The barely perceptible bitterness underlying honey from late blooming flowers, the ghost of applewood smoke in autumn bacon, the faint sweetness at the finish of good bread, these nuances now provide as much satisfaction as more obvious flavors once did. Perhaps this is wisdom of a sort, this growing attention to what exists beneath the immediate and the parent. In the quiet of evening, sometimes you allow yourself a final taste before sleep, a small cup of warmed milk with a measure of honey stirred in a combination that recalls childhood security without words. This simple comfort eases the transition from day's demands to night's vulnerability, a gentle conclusion to the day's symphony of flavors. Memory inhabits objects and spaces around you, turning the material world into a landscape of personal history. Unlike the official records kept in the fortress archives, those carefully inked chronicles of battles and treatise your private geography of remembrance exists in touchstones, both humble and profound. The oak chest at the foot of your bed contains more than physical possessions, it holds the layered sediment of your past. Beneath winter cloaks and formal attire lies a small wooden box with a hinged lid. Inside rests your father's signet ring, to worn for proper use, but irreplaceable in sentimental value. You rarely look at it, yet drawing comfort, simply from knowing it remains there, a small weight anchoring you to your lineage. Beside the ring, wrapped in faded blue cloth, rests a river stone perfectly smoothed by centuries of current. You collected it during your first independent patrol, a token of that initial taste of responsibility. Its cool solidity in your palm has calmed you through countless moments of uncertainty over the years. Sometimes before difficult council meetings, you carry it in your pockets, your thumb finding its polished surface when discussions grow tense. The sword mounted above your hearth is no longer used for combat. Its blade, though well maintained, has been superseded by more modern weapons, yet you keep it displayed not as decoration, but as testament. This was the blade that defended the Eastern Passage during the siege of your 23rd summer, when for 3 days you held position with 7 others against forces that should have overwhelmed you. The small nick near the hilt reminds you of mortality and fortune. How different history might have been had that strike landed an inch to the left. Your window alcove preserves different memories. The stone seat bears an almost imperceptible groove worn by years of sitting in the same position, watching the same landscape through changing seasons. Here you observe the construction of the new mill 5 summers ago, the gradual clearing of the western forest for farmland, the rebuilding of the village after the Great Fire. This viewpoint has allowed you to witness time's passage across the land, a visual chronicle of community resilience and change. Scents trigger memories with particular vividness. The lavender sachet tucked among your linens recalls your mother's chambers, where dried flowers hung from rafters and filled drawers with their clean fragrance. The distinctive smell of saddle leather instantly transports you to your first riding lessons, to the mixture of terror and exhilaration as you learn to command an animal 10 times your weight. The scent of pine smoke brings back the winter campaign in the northern forests, where you and your companions huddled around meager fires, sharing stories to keep fear at bay as wolves howled in the darkness. Certain sounds serve as bridges to the past. The particular creaking of the 3rd step on the western staircase reminds you of midnight descents during your youth, when you would sneak to the kitchens for extra bread or to the ramparts for solitary contemplation of the stars. The distant call of the red-winged thrush that nests in the courtyard elm connects you to each spring of your tenure here, its melody unchanged, while human affairs shift and transform. Foods carry their own memories. The taste of blackberries immediately conjures the autumn, when peace finally settled across the region after years of border skirmishes. The entire fortress had participated in gathering the abundant harvest, purple-stained fingers working alongside one another regardless of rank. That evening's feast, where blackberry tarts were shared among all residents, symbolized a turning point, the possibility of focusing on growth rather than defense. The chapel holds concentrated memory in its very stones. The worn hollow in the prayer bench marks where generations of knees have pressed in supplication or gratitude. The left side of the altar bears a nearly invisible stain from the time wine was spilled during a particularly enthusiastic harvest blessing. You sometimes trace your fingers over these marks, feeling connection to those who occupied your position in years past, those who will follow in years to come. Some memories reside in absence rather than presence. The empty chair at council meetings silently commemorates Sir Roland, whose wisdom guided the fortress through 3 decades before illness claimed him last winter. No one has officially taken his place, as if the community collectively acknowledges that some voids should remain unfilled, at least for a time. The unused cottage near the eastern wall stands as reminder of the family lost to plague 5 years past, maintained out of respect, but uninhabited, a space for remembrance. People themselves become repositories of shared memory. Old Willem, the cook, remains one of the few who remember the fortress before the northern tower was added. His occasional stories of the previous layout help preserve knowledge that architectural changes might otherwise erase. The ancient nursemaid who tends to the Lord's grandchildren carries folk remedies and lullabies that connect current residents to traditions centuries old. Your own body archives experience in scars and sensations. The shoulder that aches before rainfall holds the memory of a tournament injury from your 20th year. Your hands remember the weight and balance of weapons you haven't held in decades. Your lungs recall the particular breathlessness of high mountain passes crossed during diplomatic missions to neighboring territories. Most precious are the memories that exist without physical anchors, moments of beauty or significance stored only in mind and heart. The perfect alignment of moonlight on fresh snow that transformed the courtyard into silver one midwinter night. The expression on a young squire's face when you publicly acknowledged his courage for his first battle. The silence that fell over the great hall when news arrived of the old king's death, a collective intake of breath that marked the turning of an era. You've learned that memory is both blessing and burden, providing context and continuity, while sometimes binding you to perspectives that require reconsideration. You've witnessed how community memory can preserve wisdom through generations, but also how it can calcify into prejudice when unchallenged. This understanding has taught you to hold even treasured memories with a certain gentleness, allowing them to inform without constraining your vision of what might yet be possible. In quiet moments, you sometimes imagine memory as water flowing between present and past, nourishing current understanding with accumulated experience, occasionally freezing into fixed narratives, but always containing the potential to thaw and move again when circumstances demand new patterns of thought. This fluid concept of remembrance has allowed you to honor history without becoming its prisoner. You've learned that honor is not just a word pronounced in grand halls, but something built in silent gestures when you share your bread with the hungry squire, when you patiently listen to the blacksmith's concerns about his sick daughter, when you walk through stone corridors, recognizing each echo as part of a familiar symphony. The weight of honor is different from the weight of expectation. One is chosen, the other imposed. The physical burden of armor is straightforward: 50 pounds of metal distributed across your frame, pressing down with measurable force. You know precisely how it restricts movement, how it transfers heat, how it protects vital areas, while leaving others vulnerable. This weight is quantifiable, understood, prepared for through years of training. The weight of responsibility proves more complex. It has no defined edges, no measurable mass, yet it presses upon you with greater force than any material burden. It lies heavy in your chest when decisions must be made that will affect others' lives. It manifests as tension across your shoulders when you must represent not just yourself, but an entire community. It shows in the careful consideration, each word spoken in council, knowing that casual statements from someone in your position can be interpreted as policy or promise. You carry the expectations of those above you in rank, the Lord who relies on your judgment, the senior knights who expect you to uphold traditions. They instilled the king whose distant authority you represent in daily interactions. These expectations sometimes conflict, creating impossible geometries of duty that require painful compromise. Simultaneously, you bear the expectations of those who serve under your direction, guards who trust your tactical decisions, will not waste their lives, servants who depend on your fair treatment for their security, villagers who look to you for protection from threats, both external and internal. Their trust is a precious burden, one you feel most acutely in the quiet hours before dawn, when doubts surface like mist from shadowed ground. The weight of knowledge presses uniquely. You know things others don't, the true state of the kingdoms. Politics, the actual grain reserves compared to the numbers publicly announced, the secret agreements with neighboring territories. This information cannot be shared widely, yet it informs decisions that affect everyone under your care. The isolation of such knowledge creates a particular heaviness, a separation from casual conversation and uncomplicated relationships. Memory adds its own weight, accumulated grief for those lost under your command, awareness of past mistakes and their consequences the slow accretion of compromises made in service to necessity rather than principle. Unlike physical burdens that can be set down, these memories travel with you, always influencing present actions through lessons painfully acquired. The weight of identity, the person you are expected to become versus the person you recognize in quiet moments of self-reflection, creates a constant subtle tension. Parts of yourself have been set aside in service to your role, others have been developed beyond natural inclination to meet the demands of position. This internal negotiation between duty and authentic self requires constant attention, a balancing act that sometimes exhausts more thoroughly than any physical exertion. You carry awareness of your own mortality alongside responsibility for others' survival. Each decision balances these considerations. How much risk is acceptable for whom, under what circumstances? This calculation becomes routine, despite its regular necessity. The weight of potential consequences accompanies every order given, every strategy implemented, every resource allocated. The burden of example rests perpetually on your shoulders. You are watched constantly by young squires, learning what knighthood means through your behavior, by servants gauging the practical application of the values officially espoused, by peers measuring their own conduct against yours. This awareness shapes even private moments, knowing that true character reveals itself precisely when no formal observation occurs. Perhaps most complicated is the weight of compassion in a role that sometimes requires hardness. You've learned to carry both simultaneously, the necessary firmness of command alongside genuine concern for those affected by your decisions. This dual awareness prevents both the coldness of pure pragmatism and the ineffectiveness of unchecked empathy, but maintaining this balance requires constant internal vigilance. The burden of incomplete information accompanies nearly every significant choice. You must decide and act with partial knowledge, weighing probabilities, assessing risks, committing to directions that cannot easily be reversed once undertaken. The responsibility for outcomes rests with you regardless of how limited the information was when decisions were required. The weight of tradition anchors you to practices established by predecessors, some wise, some merely habitual. Discerning which traditions contain essential wisdom and which perpetuate outdated responses to past conditions requires diplomatic navigation of established expectations, while creating space for necessary adaptation. You carry the future as well as the present. Your actions now will create conditions inherited by those who come after, just as you deal daily with circumstances shaped by those who preceded you. This temporal responsibility extends beyond your likely lifespan, connecting your momentary decisions to consequences that may unfold decades hence. The greatest weight, perhaps, is knowing the gap between ideal and possible, between the perfect justice you would wish to establish and the compromised reality actually achieve within existing constraints. This knowledge could lead to cynicism or surrender. Instead, you've chosen to carry it as a productive tension, allowing the ideal to guide your direction while accepting the limitations of immediate circumstance. What has surprised you most over years of bearing these multiple burdens is discovering that some weights become foundations rather than restrictions. The responsibility that once felt imposed has transformed gradually into purpose. The expectations that seemed confining have in many cases helped shape a self you've come to value. The knowledge that once isolated now affords meaningful connection and service. This alchemical transformation from burden to foundation hasn't eliminated the weight. Rather, it has integrated it into your being so completely that you would feel unbalanced without it, like a sailor returned to land who misses the constant motion of the sea. The weight has become part of your strength, inseparable from your capacity to stand firm when circumstances demand steadfastness. You've discovered that resisting doesn't always mean wielding swords or conquering territories. Sometimes the most profound acts of resistance happen in quieter moments, finding beauty in the repetition of days, in the morning conversation with the priest who tends the chapel, in the ritual of polishing armor, until it reflects not only your image, but also the golden light that enters through the window at Intardisa. The most essential form of resistance you practice is against despair itself. In a world where brutality often seems rewarded and kindness forgotten, you deliberately cultivate hope through small, consistent actions. Each morning you choose to rise and meet the day with presence rather than resignation. This choice, repeated through years of both hardship and ease, forms the backbone of a resistance more durable than any momentary defiance. You resist the temptation of cynicism, that corroding force that would have you believe nothing matters beyond power and self-interest. When younger knights mock an old servant's trembling hands, or laugh at a village child's simple prayer or quiet intervention, I find his dedication admirable. Create space for a different perspective. Without sermonizing, you demonstrate that respect costs nothing yet enriches both giver and receiver. Against the hierarchy that would separate you from those who serve the fortress, you practice small subversions of equality. You learn names, remember details of lives and families, acknowledge work often rendered invisible by its very consistency. The kitchen helpers who rise before dawn, the stable boys who sleep among the horses, the washerwomen whose hands crack from lye and cold water, you make sure they know you see their essential contributions to the community's functioning. When harsh judgments are proposed in council meetings, excessive punishment for minor infractions, dismissal of complaints from the lower town, retribution against neighboring communities for perceived slights, you offer alternatives that consider long-term consequences beyond immediate satisfaction. Your measured voice introduces questions of proportion and precedent that slow reactive decisions without directly challenging authority. You resist forgetfulness, that convenient erasure of uncomfortable truths. When victories are celebrated in the Great Hall, lightly toast those who fell in achieving them, ensuring their names remain part of the narrative. When failed harvests or harsh winters are referenced as distant history, you gently remind listeners of lessons learned through those difficulties, preserving institutional memory that might prevent repeated mistakes. Against the fortress's tendency toward isolation, you maintain connections with the wider world. You welcome travelers and listen to their stories without immediate suspicion, understanding that new ideas and perspectives strengthen rather than threaten a vital community. You encourage the Lord to send promising young people to study in distant centers of learning, as they will return with knowledge that benefits everyone. You resist the corruption of language, the way words like honor, duty, and service can be emptied of meaning through careless use or deliberate manipulation. In your own speech, you ensure these terms retain their substance through alignment with your actions. You demonstrate that honor means keeping promises even when inconvenient, that duty extends to all community members rather than flowing only upward to power, that true service involves seeing and addressing real needs rather than performing hollow gestures. Against the human tendency to categorize and divide, you practice recognition of common humanity. When refugees arrive from territories experiencing conflict, you point out similarities rather than differences, shared concerns for children's futures, common appreciation for a warm meal, universal vulnerability to illness and injury. Without directly challenging prejudice, you create conditions where it becomes more difficult to maintain. You resist the pressure to separate body from spirit, to value intellectual or religious practice above physical work. Your willingness to join harvest efforts when hands are needed to assist in rebuilding after storms, to stand night watch alongside common guards during crises, demonstrates integration rather than hierarchy of different forms of contribution. Against the fortress's occasional impulse toward cruelty, justified as necessary discipline or rightful punishment, you advocate for responses that restore rather than merely penalize. When a young page steals food from the kitchen, you investigate the hunger that motivated the act rather than simply enforcing consequences. When villages fall behind in tribute during difficult seasons, you suggest adjustments to obligations rather than punitive collection. You resist the glorification of violence that permeates knightly culture, neither denying your participation in necessary defense, nor celebrating destruction as inherently honorable. Young squires who arrive filled with Romantic notions of battle learn from your example that protection of community, personal glory, forms the true heart of a warrior's purpose. Against the isolation that high position can create, you maintain practices of connection, sharing meals in the common hall, rather than always dining separately, participating in seasonal celebrations alongside all fortress residents, making yourself available for concerns to minor, for formal petitions, but significant to individual lives. You resist rigidity of thought, remaining open to reconsideration and growth even in advanced years. When new methods of crop rotation prove more effective than traditional practices, you support their implementation, despite initial resistance from conservative elements. When younger knights propose tactical innovations, you evaluate them on merit, rather than dismissing them as challenges to established authority. These forms of resistance rarely appear in chronicles or songs. They win no visible victories, earn no commemorative monuments. Yet their cumulative effect shapes the community profoundly than dramatic gestures or momentary stands. Through consistent small choices, you've demonstrated that alternatives to dominant separation and force exist and can successfully sustain a society. What makes this resistance effective is precisely its unspectacular nature. It works beneath notice-changing assumptions, rather than directly confronting them, creating new patterns of interaction that gradually render old models obsolete. Like water wearing away stone, this patient persistence transforms the seemingly immovable through gentle constant pressure. The greatest resistance you practice is against the voice, sometimes external, sometimes within your own mind, that insists meaningful change is impossible, that human nature remains fixed in its worst aspects, that power inevitably corrupts, that violence always returns. Against this determinism, you place your daily choice to act as if different outcomes are possible, as if kindness matters, as if each person's contributions have value regardless of rank or recognition. This choice, renewed each morning as you rise to meet another day, forms the foundation of a revolution, so quiet it might not be recognized as such, yet so fundamental, it changes everything it touches. People perceive you differently depending on their position, needs, and experiences. The multiplicity of these perspectives creates a complex portrait that no single viewpoint could capture, like a cut gem, reflecting different colors depending on the angle of light. To the young squires and pages, you represent an ideal to emulate, the embodiment of the knightly virtues they aspire to cultivate. They watch your movements in the training yard with careful attention, noting how you adjust your stance for different opponents, how you maintain composure regardless of provocation. They study the way you address both nobility and servants, searching for clues to the dignity that seems to emanate naturally from your bearing. What they cannot see is the years of practice behind each fluid motion, the conscious effort once required for what now appears effortless. Among these young observers, whispered stories circulate about your past achievements, some accurate, others embellished through repeated tellings. They don't witness your private moments of doubt or the nights when old wounds ache with approaching storms. Their admiration, though genuine, addresses a partial version of you, the public figure, rather than the complete person. The Lord sees you as a reliable instrument of stability, someone whose judgment can be trusted when political considerations complicate clear decision-making. In council meetings, he often looks to you, to others have spoken, gauging your subtle reactions before announcing his own position. He values your directness in private consultations, knowing you will speak necessary truths without political calculation. What he may not fully appreciate is the careful consideration behind your apparent straightforwardness, how you weigh words to offer honest assessment without unnecessary offense. To the household staff, you represent a different kind of authority than other nobles, one who notices their efforts and acknowledges their humanity. The head cook appreciates that you thank him personally for particularly fine meals. The stable hands remember how you helped repair damaged stalls after the summer storm without being asked. The aging steward values your patience with his increasingly slow recitation of accounts. These relationships, built through years of small considerations, create a foundation of respect that transcends required deference to rank. The villagers who live beyond the fortress walls view you as an intermediary between their concerns and the formal power of lordship. When drought threatens crops, or wolves take too many sheep, they bring these troubles to you first, knowing you will advocate for appropriate assistance. They see you as part of the nobility, but somehow more accessible, bridge figure who understands both worlds. This perception brings both opportunity and limitation, allowing you to facilitate solutions, but sometimes placing you in difficult positions between competing interests. Fellow knights regard you with a mixture of respect and subtle competitive awareness. Your reputation for fairness makes you a sort of arbiter for their disputes. Your known integrity makes your approval valuable currency in their social exchanges. Yet they also measure themselves against your standards, sometimes finding motivation in this comparison, sometimes resentment. The complexity of these peer relationships requires careful navigation, maintaining true connection without becoming either aloof or overly familiar. The elderly see in you continuity with traditions they value, and worrying might be forgotten. They appreciate your attendance at seasonal rituals, your knowledge of fortress history, your willingness to listen to stories they've told many times before. What may escape their notice is how you subtly adapt these traditions when necessary, preserving their essence while allowing for changing circumstances, a stewardship of cultural inheritance rather than rigid preservation. Children perceive you differently than they do other adults of your rank. Where they might shy away from most knights, they approach you with cautious curiosity, sensing something approachable beneath the formal exterior. Perhaps they recognize the moments when you still see the world with something of their wonder, stopping to observe a spider's web jeweled with morning dew, or smiling at the antics of newborn lambs in spring fields. Those who have fought alongside you, defense of the fortress, carry yet another perception. They know the decisive commander who emerges in crisis, the strategic thinker who anticipates problems before they develop, the leader who accepts risk to protect those under his charge. These comrades understand aspects of your character invisible during peacetime, the clarity that replaces hesitation when immediate action is required, the calm that deepens rather than fractures under pressure. The religious community, Father Ambrose and the brothers who maintain the chapel, view you through yet another lens. They value your regular attendance at services, but more deeply appreciate your practical support for their charitable work. Your contributions often arrive quietly, extra food directed to their kitchens during winter months, repairs to the chapel roof arranged without fanfare, protection ensured for brothers traveling to outlying communities. They recognize that your faith manifests more through works than words. Those who have received your mercy carry perhaps the most complex perception. The young soldier whose theft you punished with additional duties, rather than the customary flogging, the border farmer whose trespass you addressed with warning rather than seizure of property, the drunk guard whose lapse you met with reassignment rather than dismissal. These individuals know a justice tempered by understanding of human frailty. Their view of you combines healthy respect with profound relief. What none of these perspectives captures entirely is your inner landscape, the private thoughts that accompany public actions, the memories that inform current choices, the questions that remain unresolved despite outward certainty. The gap between external perception and internal experience creates a solitude that is both burden and refuge, isolating in its uniqueness, yet providing space for authentic reflection unconstrained by others' expectations. You've learned to recognize the limitations of all these viewpoints without dismissing their partial truths. Each reflects an aspect of who you are and what you contribute to the community. Together they create a mosaic more accurate than any single image could be, complex, sometimes contradictory, continuously evolving as you and those around you change through time's passage. Perhaps most significant is what remains unseen across all these perspectives: the daily choice to continue serving with integrity despite recognition that perfection remains unattainable, the ongoing effort to align action with principle even when no one is watching, the sustained attempt to meet others with genuine presence rather than habitual response. These interior commitments, invisible to external observation, form the foundation for all that others do perceive. Beauty finds you in unexpected moments, appearing not as grand vistas or dramatic events, but in the quiet corners of ordinary experience. You've trained yourself to notice these instances, to collect them like smooth stones, found along a familiar path, keeping them in the pocket of memory to touch during darker hours. You find beauty in the quality of light that enters your chamber at different hours, the cool blue of early morning that makes the stone walls appear almost translucent, the warm amber of late afternoon that transforms simple objects into repositories of gold, the silver grey of twilight that softens all edges and blurs the boundary between the tangible world and something more ephemeral. The fortress architecture, designed primarily for defense, reveals unexpected harmonies from certain angles. From your window at sunrise, the eastern tower catches first light, while the courtyard remains in shadow, creating a contrast of illumination and darkness that perfectly balances opposing elements. The spiral staircase in the north passage, viewed from below, creates a geometric precision that draws the eye upward in a movement both physical and contemplative. Water holds particular beauty in this dry region. The brief silver threading of rainfall down the central courtyard's stone pillars, the concentric patterns formed when droplets hit the calm surface of the well, the transformation of mundane objects under a coating of dew each morning. These aqueous moments catch your attention precisely because of their transience. You notice beauty in the evidence of time's passage, the subtle patina that has developed on the great hall's wooden tables after centuries of use, the smooth depression worn in stone steps by thousands of footfalls, the softened edges of the fortress walls where weather has gradually reshaped human construction. These signs of age speak to continuity that transcends individual experience, connecting present moments to a longer story of which you form just one chapter. Human movement contains its own quiet beauty. The blacksmith's economy of gesture, refined through decades of practice until each hammer stroke falls with perfect precision. The old shepherd's fluid communion with his flock, barely perceptible signals guiding their collective movement across the landscape. The cook's hands shaping dough with a rhythm that seems to flow from some deeper source than conscious thought. These practiced actions reveal grace within utility. You find beauty in resilience, the fortress herb garden flourishing despite the harsh climate, the ancient oak in the eastern courtyard that survived lightning strike and drought to put forth new leaves each spring, the village children playing improvised games amid the challenges of rural life. This persistent vitality amid difficulty offers evidence of some fundamental affirmation, the heart of existence. Sounds create their own architecture of beauty. The layered voices of the small chapel choir, where individuals of varying skill blend to create harmonies none could produce alone, the rhythmic counterpoint of different crafts being practiced simultaneously in the lower Bailey blacksmiths. Hammer carpenters, saw weavers, shuttle, creating an unintentional but perfect music of community. The particular resonance of wind moving through the narrow passages between buildings, sometimes producing tones that seem almost deliberately composed. You appreciate beauty in functionality tools, whose design has been refined over generations until they achieve a perfect marriage of form and purpose. The network of water channels that distribute rainfall from the fortress roof to storage cisterns, elegant in both conception and execution. The traditional construction of the peasants' field shelters, using only local materials to create structures perfectly adapted to the region's weather patterns. Language itself offers beauty in this multilingual borderland. You notice the particular cadence of the old dialect still spoken by some elderly villagers, its rounded vowels and melodic intonation preserving sounds from an earlier era. The precise terminology used by craftspeople to describe subtle variations in their materials and techniques, words that exist nowhere else and carry accumulated wisdom in their very sounds. The measured language of formal judgments, where balanced phrases and careful rhythms elevate necessary decisions to expressions of underlying order. You find unexpected beauty in imperfection, the misaligned stones in the western wall that create shadow patterns unlike any in the more precise construction elsewhere. The off-center door of the chapel, that nevertheless feels exactly right in the building's overall composition, the slightly asymmetrical features of the captain of the guard that animate his face with character no perfect symmetry could convey. Natural cycles reveal beauty through contrast and return. The first green shoots emerging from seemingly dead winter soil, the transformation of bare branches into explosions of blossom, before settling into the more restrained beauty of full leaf, the gradual turning of green to gold across the surrounding fields as summer yields to autumn. These transitions connect daily experience to rhythms that preceded human presence and will continue beyond it. You notice beauty in human relationships, the wordless understanding between the elderly couple who have served the fortress for 5 decades, their coordinated movements, requiring no verbal communication, the careful way the master stonemason guides his apprentices' hands, transferring knowledge that cannot be fully articulated in words, the circle of women who gather to preserve the autumn harvest, their work punctuated by stories and laughter that transform necessity into communion. Even in sorrow, you've learned to find a stark beauty, the dignity with which the village elder buried his last son, his grief contained, but honored through ritual, the community's response to fire in the lower town, strangers working alongside neighbors to salvage what could be saved, the wounded soldier facing mortality with quiet courage, making peace with his life's limitations before departing it. These moments reveal human capacity for meaning-making even in extremity. Beauty exists in paradox, the delicate wildflowers that somehow grow from cracks in the fortress walls, fragility emerging from strength, the mighty war horses gentled by the touch of a child, the hardened warrior moved to tears by a simple song. These contradictions suggest some underlying unity that reconciles apparent opposites. What you've come to value most is beauty's democracy, its presence available regardless of rank or circumstance. The same sunset illuminates lord and servant. Alike the same spring flowers bloom for anyone with eyes to see them. The same patterns of frost form on windows throughout the fortress when winter takes hold. This universality offers common ground in a world often divided by artificial boundaries. You collect these moments not as escape from reality, but as its deepest affirmation, evidence that beneath the surface of daily struggles and political machinations lies an ordering principle that reveals itself in glimpses of harmony, proportion, and rightness. These experiences of beauty have become over time a form of sustenance, as essential as bread or water, nourishment for some part of your being that cannot survive on duty alone. Sleep comes to you differently each night, influenced by the day's events, the season's character, the position of stars visible through your narrow window. There is no single pattern to your surrender to darkness, but rather variations on a theme that has developed through years of learning your body's needs and limits. The preparations for sleep follow a ritual established through repetition rather than formal design. You remove your outer garments deliberately, each movement an unconscious step toward transition. The weight of responsibility eases as physical burdens are set aside, sword belt placed on its stand, boots arranged beneath the chair, day clothes folded with habitual precision. These actions signal to both body and mind that a boundary is being crossed between public service and private restoration. Your chamber transforms as night deepens. Shadows lengthen from corners, familiar objects lose their definition, and the stone walls that seemed solid by day reveal their porousness to sound. The distant changing of the guard, the occasional cry of night birds, the subtle settling of the ancient building around you. These auditory reminders of continuing life beyond your room sometimes comfort, sometimes distract, depending on your state of mind. The bed itself has become a known territory, its contours mapped by your body through countless nights. Not luxurious by noble standards, it offers sufficient comfort for practical rest. A straw mattress changed seasonally, wool blankets of varying weights for different temperatures, linen sheets washed weekly by the fortress laundresses. The pillow stuffed with down, saved from years of kitchen foul, bears the impression of your head, a physical memory of previous surrender to sleep. On warm summer nights, when heat remains trapped in the stone walls, you sometimes move the thinnest blanket to the window alcove and sleep there, allowing whatever breeze might come to cool your skin. These nights often bring dreams of open spaces, meadows stretching toward distant mountains, rivers winding through unmarked territories, skies unbroken by human construction. You wake from these dreams feeling temporarily unbounded, as if something essential has briefly escaped the constraints of duty and returned to elemental freedom. Winter brings different patterns. You bank the small hearth fire carefully before retiring, balancing the need for warmth against the risk of embers. Additional blankets create a welcome weight that seems to press the day's tensions from your muscles. The cold air above the covers contrasts with the growing warmth beneath them, creating a microcosm of the season's essential nature, hardship surrounding a protected core of sustaining heat. On the coldest nights, you sometimes wake to find frost patterns on the inside of your window glass, delicate crystalline structures that will vanish with first light. The transition from wakefulness happens in stages that have become familiar. Through repetition, first comes the heaviness in your limbs, a pleasant surrender of physical tension. Then attention begins to drift, thoughts losing their linear quality and blending into associations unbound by logic. Images rise from memory, or imagination faces from the past, places never visited, scenes composed of elements from different experiences combined in new configurations. Finally, the awareness of self, as separate from these internal movements, fades, and consciousness dissolves into sleep's deeper currents. Dreams visit with varying clarity and significance. Some nights bring only impressions that dissolve upon waking, sensations of movement, fragments of conversation, emotional colorations that leave their trace without specific content. Other nights deliver narratives of surprising coherence, detailed encounters with people long dead, journeys through landscapes, both familiar and impossible situations that present dilemmas. Your waking mind continues to ponder after sleep has ended. You've noticed patterns in these dreaming experiences over the years. After days of difficult decisions, you often dream of water, swimming in lakes whose depths remain mysterious, navigating rivers with unpredictable currents, standing before oceans that stretch beyond sight. Following periods of relative peace, your dreams frequently feature childhood locations, recalled with preternatural clarity: the orchard behind your father's house, the stone bridge where you first learned to fish, the high meadow where summer gatherings took place. Sometimes sleep ambushes you, unexpectedly claiming consciousness before formal preparations have been completed. After particularly exhausting days, training from dawn until dusk, riding patrol through difficult weather, mediating tense disputes among fortress residents, you occasionally find yourself waking fully clothed, having surrendered to fatigue before completing your usual rituals. These instances of overwhelming tiredness bring sleep of exceptional depth, though often briefer duration than usual. Other nights, sleep proves elusive despite physical weariness. Your mind continues its assessment of the day's events, analyzing decisions made, considering alternatives that might have produced different outcomes, planning approaches to challenges yet unresolved. During these periods of restlessness, you've developed strategies for quieting mental activity, focusing attention on the physical sensations of breathing, systematically relaxing each muscle group from feet to face, or reciting memorized verses from childhood prayers until their familiar rhythm lulls thought toward stillness. Age has changed your relationship with sleep. The deep and broken nights of youth have gradually been replaced by a more segmented pattern, falling asleep relatively quickly, but waking in the hours before dawn, spending time in contemplation before a second lighter phase of rest carries you to morning. Rather than fighting this change, you've come to value these quiet hours of semi-consciousness when the fortress sleeps around you and thoughts can wander without interruption or immediate consequence. Dreams of those no longer living visit with particular poignancy. Your father appears as he was in his prime, other than the diminished figure of his final illness. Comrades lost in battle return whole and vigorous, engaged in ordinary activities, rather than heroic ones, sharing meals, tending horses, laughing at forgotten jests. These visitations leave a bittersweet impression upon waking, a reminder of connections that transcend physical presence. The transition back to wakefulness has its own choreography. First comes awareness of your body as separate from dream narratives, then recognition of your specific location in space, then gradual reorientation to the particular day awaiting your attention. This movement from sleep's unbounded territory to the defined parameters of duty requires its own form of courage, a daily choice to re-engage with responsibility rather than lingering in private realms. What has surprised you most as years have accumulated is how sleep itself has become a form of relationship rather than merely an absence of wakefulness. You've developed a familiarity with its territories and transitions, its gifts and challenges. This relationship, if any of significance, requires attention and adaptation as circumstances change, but offers in return a renewal impossible to find elsewhere. In the moment, before consciousness fully reclaims you each morning, there often comes a brief perfect clarity, a glimpse of something fundamental beneath the particulars of the coming day. This clarity carries no specific content, but rather a quality of essential rightness, as if touching briefly on the underlying pattern that connects all separate experiences. Though it fades quickly as practical concerns reassert themselves, the impression remains a reminder of depths that daily routine can obscure, but never fully eliminate. The greatest lesson of your years has been understanding the nature of permanence, discerning what truly endures beneath the constant flow of circumstance and change. This knowledge has come gradually accumulated through observation rather than sudden revelation, a slow distillation of experience into essential wisdom. What remains you've discovered rarely corresponds to what societies claim to value most. Monuments weather and crumble, battles commemorated in song, forgotten within generations, names once spoken with reverence fade from common knowledge. Even the fortress itself, seemingly solid and eternal from a single human perspective, shows evidence of previous structures in its foundations, suggesting its own eventual transformation into something currently unimagined. Instead, what persists exists in less visible realms, patterns of relationship between people and place, traditions that adapt while maintaining their essential character values, transmitted through small daily actions rather than grand pronouncements. These continuities operate beneath the surface of recorded history, creating the true foundation upon which more visible structures temporarily rest. You've observed how knowledge passes between generations through pathways, both formal and informal. The master stonemason teaching apprentices techniques refined over centuries, mothers showing daughters how to identify healing plants in seemingly identical meadow growth. The stable master's careful instruction in reading equine behavior through subtle signals. These transmissions ensure that essential understanding survives beyond individual lifespans. The land itself maintains a kind of memory that transcends human record-keeping. Fields still show the gentle undulation of ancient cultivation patterns long after specific crops and farmers have been forgotten. Forest edges reveal boundary lines, established by agreements no longer remembered in written form. The river's course bears witness to centuries of negotiation between flowing water and resistant earth, a physical chronicle more enduring than any parchment history. Human connection creates its own permanence through repeating patterns. The way young lovers still meet by the old well despite changing customs around courtship, how children continue to transform the North Meadow into imaginary kingdoms during summer afternoons, the gathering of village elders under the council oak to resolve disputes through conversation rather than force. These social choreographies maintain continuity while accommodating inevitable change. You've come to recognize that what lasts often exists in the realm of gesture rather than achievement, the way a hand is extended in greeting or comfort, the inclination of the head that signals respect, the shared silence that acknowledges emotion, to profound for words. These physical expressions of human relationship have remained remarkably consistent across generations, creating bridges of understanding that span differences of circumstance and status. Values persist when embedded in stories rather than stated as principles. The tale of the shepherd who searched all night for a single lost lamb, told around winter hearths the account of the previous lord, refusing special treatment during famine, sharing equally in hardship, the legend of the child who spoke truth when others remained silent. These narratives transmit ethical frameworks more effectively than any formal code. Their lessons absorbed through heart as much as mind. What remains most powerfully exists in the realm of practice knowledge, held in the body, rather than merely in the intellect. The precise angle at which the scythe must meet ripened grain, the exact pressure needed to shape clay on the potter's wheel, the subtle balance adjustments that allow a rider and horse to move as one entity. These embodied understandings accumulate through generations of direct experience, creating repositories of wisdom that written records can reference, but never fully capture. The fortress's annual rhythms carry their own permanence. The spring blessing of fields before planting, the midsummer fair that brings outlying communities together for trade and celebration, the autumn harvest distribution that ensures winter survival for all residents, the midwinter observances that affirm community during the darkest season. These cyclical gatherings anchor individual lives within larger patterns of belonging and mutual support. Languages change more slowly than political boundaries, preserving perspectives and relationships to landscape that might otherwise be lost. The local dialect still contains terms for weather conditions specific to this region, distinctions between types of rainfall, but standard language cannot express names for plant varieties that grow nowhere else. In these linguistic particularities, generations of observation and adaptation remain accessible to current inhabitants. What persists through difficulty reveals essential priorities more clearly than what flourishes in abundance. During years of scarcity, fret communities consistently protect certain elements, care for the vulnerable, education of children, maintenance of clean water sources, preservation of seed stock for a future planting. These choices, repeated across different eras and circumstances, demonstrate enduring understanding of what sustains human continuity beyond immediate survival. Even within the formal power structures that seem most susceptible to disruption, certain patterns maintain remarkable stability. The relationship between those who make decisions and those who implement them, the balance between central authority and local determination, the mechanisms for addressing grievance without threatening the entire social fabric. These fundamental arrangements often survive apparent revolutions, adapting their forms while preserving core functions. You've observed how music carries elements that transcend its immediate performance, melodic patterns that evoke specific emotional responses across different generations, rhythmic structures that organize collective movement in consistent ways, harmonic relationships that create tension and resolution, recognizable to listeners separated by centuries. These musical continuities suggest underlying commonalities in human perception and response that remain constant despite cultural variation. What remains most fundamentally, you've concluded, is capacity rather than content, the human ability to make meaning from experience, to create beauty from available materials, to establish connection across difference, to find humor in difficulty, to begin again after loss. These capabilities persist through changing circumstances, enabling adaptation while maintaining essential continuity of purpose and identity. As your own life moves toward its eventual conclusion, you find comfort in recognizing your place within these larger patterns of continuance. The specific contributions you've made, decisions rendered, conflicts resolved, examples provided, matter less than your participation in these ongoing currents of human experience. What will remain of your individual existence will largely be its integration into these broader streams of community life, its small but real influence on the quality of what persists. This understanding brings neither resignation nor detachment, but rather a deeper engagement with present circumstances, informed by awareness of their connection to both past and future. Each action, however small, contributes to the character of what endures, the invisible inheritance passed between generations through countless interactions that collectively shape the world to come. In the quiet of evening, watching shadows lengthen across the courtyard, you sometimes feel yourself momentarily suspended between time frames, simultaneously present in your immediate experience and part of something that extends far beyond your singular perspective. This sensation, once disconcerting, has become a source of profound peace, a lived recognition that what truly matters continues with or without individual recognition, carrying the essential forward through the changing surface of events.